He's got the coolest name tag, right? I want one of those.
Excellent. Maybe one spare, so let's get make it happen. Cool. My name is Aarno Aukia. I'm a co-founder of Vision, the DevOps company based in Zurich. I've had many interesting discussions today, of course, around digital neutrality, about sovereignty, about platforms and platform engineering that I want to kind of close off with and share with you some thoughts before I'm going into the panel discussions. Discuss it all, Alec, and of course having hopefully questions also from you guys. When I founded Vision 12 years ago, we had a hypothesis. The hypothesis was that digitalization, which was kind of the topic at the time, would mean that more and more companies would become software companies. And I guess the whole trend of AI has accelerated that, and maybe even more than accelerated that as well. So writing software has become faster, easier, quicker, potentially cheaper. Let's see how that turns out in the midterm, right? So you have AI that writes code, but the hard part of software engineering, I guess that one has not changed, right? The need for senior engineers to think about architecture, think about security, think about how to operate and run the software. I guess that AI hasn't changed. Or I think we had in keynotes and in sessions today, the insight that either you bring it up front and give that architecture and insight and expert know-how to the AI, or then you hire an expert afterwards to clean it all up, right? And so I guess that part hasn't changed, but it's kind of moved, right? Before you had to invest this kind of know-how and experience and hire the right people, and now it's very easy to start and then maybe learn it, the hard lesson afterwards, right? But that also means that this shift means that the importance of for example, the runtime, how you run it, where you run it, which tools you use, which technologies you use, that kind of has grown in importance, right? Because kind of the investment has moved to that side. And so the kind of the focus has shifted to where and how you operationalize that. And so I guess that's kind of an industrial revolution, right? When the core challenge moved from making the product to making the factory that can produce products as many as needed and as quickly as needed, right? So this kind of data problem, I guess that's something that we as an industry are in the middle of being industrialized or having an industrial revolution for our whole industry. So we had it in the keynote, we had it in the summary of the sovereignty check, right? It's the control aspect that is key, right? You control the machine, you control the AI, you control the results, you control the architecture, you control the design so that something comes out that is actually useful, right? And that kind of feeling of slipping the control, right? So shipping faster but feeling less in control. That's kind of an interesting human part in this whole digital software technology world, right? So the AI writes more code, but it's still the humans that design the consequences of that software, right? And it's very similar kind of, I would call it an operational problem of platform gravity, right? So with more layers of abstraction, it's easier to kind of slip the grip of the technology. And I guess it's the same thing that our ancestors had when, programming computers was like soldering and flipping dip switches, and then somebody came up with a compiler and high-level programming languages, and everybody thought like, oh no, we're gonna lose the touch to the machine, right? And now we're, I don't know, 7, 8, 10 steps further ahead in abstractions with cloud infrastructure and so on anyway. But this kind of abstraction, of course, produces gravity, right? So the tools we use, the apps we develop, the models we integrate, these, of course, need data, and this kind of pulls all together on kind of infrastructure. And of course, using AI models pulls it to big infrastructure, to centralized infrastructure, right? So I feel like AI is one of the biggest kind of centralizing forces our industry has seen. And of course, this data gravity, so to wherever the data is, then of course all the services are, and that kind of self-fulfilling prophecy, because the data is already there, and there's maybe an even ecosystem of other tools and software, then of course that keeps on increasing kind of this kind of centralization, right? And the centralization of only a select few platforms, I guess that's the whole point of the whole discussion of digital sovereignty that was also an important topic today. So the architecture now is not only kind of a technical detail discussed in a basement between a few engineers, it's actually now part of strategy, right? Who do you want to give control to? Awesome, comparison with marriage, right? Have you chosen your architectural companion in a similar way, or was it an accident, which might also be a strategy, right? But for both use cases. But I guess now it's the architectural platform security that's now the scarce strategic skills, and this kind of the resource are no longer the code tools that are just part of it. And I guess this kind of industrializing of the software of software operations is also a big driver for what we call platform engineering. I think the term was now 2 or 3 years old, but kind of the patterns of not only building apps, but building tools and platforms and systems and teams and infrastructure that can deploy multiple apps, that can reuse these tools and coding, and of course can reuse it on different infrastructure, make it infrastructure agnostic. I guess that's something that then gives this kind of this neutrality, right? It gives you the choice back, so you can choose and change infrastructure. So that's not being indecisive or keeping the options open or being hybrid. It's architecture, right? To build on top of open tools and open standards. It doesn't have to be open source, but at least open standards, so that you can move if necessary. And if you're under FINMA regulation, then you actually have to prove it with a documented process how you can do within 12 months, or else you're not compliant, right? So then there's drivers to push you to think about this province if you don't. But the whole sovereignty topic, there was an interesting discussion had over a coffee this morning. The whole sovereignty topic has been super emotional, right? Are we sovereign or are we not? How much should we be? How much does it cost? Is it even possible to be sovereign, right? And that kind of was difficult for him. And it was only 6 weeks ago that the EU published the EU 180 million euro tender for sovereign cloud infrastructure services, which I guess they award 180 million every day, right? But the whole point wasn't the 4 providers that got selected, is that they created a framework of measuring sovereignty. So now it's not are we sovereign or not. Now we can start discussing, okay, in which of these 8 dimensions do we want to be sovereign? Do we need to be sovereign? How much is it worth? We want to get further, we want to increase that. So for example, supply chain, which is actually the highest ranked dimension, all of us, we use chips from Far East or technology in the US, and that's okay. If you have clarity about that, if we document that, right? But then there's other, for example, strategic, who can turn off my service, right? Legal, who has access to it and who is influenced. And of course, the example of the cloud service that gets turned off overnight is in all of our minds that from just last week, right? So there are, of course, now that there are kind of measurable, discussable, plannable dimensions, that kind of also changed for me this whole sovereignty discussion. Because now it's not black and white anymore. Now there's a whole measuring framework, and here's 180 million euros kind of backing that up, right? And I think it's only a matter of time until this kind of measuring comes to Switzerland or to private sector as well. So for me, in Switzerland, neutrality and neutral platform design, I guess that's here in a pole position to position ourselves there. As you can imagine, I'm super optimistic, right? We have an engineering heritage of high tech, of focusing on automation, focusing on quality, focusing on these kind of values, which I think are super important and super relevant and will also make us super successful also in age of AI at the sovereignty. So this kind of having to think about regulation, having to think about important data, having to think about open source, and for example, having a Swiss law that says that the federal government has to open source all of their custom software development, except if they have a good reason why not to. So by default, they have to open source it. I guess that's applied openness, applied sovereignty, and being in control of the tool and software in this case that makes sense, and not just consuming it as a consumer, but actually being part of that. So, as I mentioned, right, the old model is build an application, deploy it in the cloud, run it there. The new model is building a whole tool set, a whole platform that are services that are portable so that all of your apps can be managed, can be run anywhere. And that's the kind of tooling and the kind of framework that helps then to deploy dozens, if not hundreds of apps on top of any infrastructure, which of course gives you back this choice of infrastructure, of tooling, and in the end of software. So the question isn't which cloud you choose, but whether your architecture enables you to have that choice tomorrow. Because if you are dependent, you have to ask for the permission. But if you're a sovereign, you can ship. Thank you.
Oh, you are fast. Very good. Thank you, Aarno, for this very interesting presentation.